Hello everyone, it's Infinity Gamer here, and we've had some bombshell news about Achilles. I've been trying to digest the video that Corvus Belli have just released about M5. Achilles, the Homerid Champion, the famous face of Steel Phalanx and Aleph, a hero in Days of Lore with the Iliad, is suddenly part of the combined army in M5. Needless to say, a lot of people are disappointed, they're up in arms about it. Others are just curiously sitting back and going, how did this happen? What's going on? I was one of those people in the latter camp. I was like, did we get any indication that this was the direction Corvus Belli were heading in? It turns out we may have had a few clues. We have to dive into a couple of different resources to see that this was being set up over time. If you've missed a lot of the update, you don't know what I'm talking about, check out the combined army video from Corvus Belli that talks about M5 armies. One of the key things that sparks a lot of what's going on is the fact that they're very open in that video that Achilles is now part of the combined army. What we don't know is a whole bunch of stuff. Does that mean that Achilles is no longer part of Aleph? And we may have some clues in some of the lore as to what Achilles' fate may be. Then we look at the new vanilla combined army sheet. Corvus Belli have been really open about the fact that vanilla armies, the main factions themselves, are going to be stripped way back. What we haven't known is, does that mean that units and models are no longer going to be available, or are they only going to be available in sectorials and things like that? We start to get glimpses of the answers here when we look at the combined army video that Corvus Belli have released. When we look at that lineup, we can see there is much less in terms of unit options. One thing that has really drawn people's eyes is the new Team Achilles section of the combined army, which contains Pandora, researcher of Team Achilles himself, Teucer, the shooter of Team Achilles, Teucer, the dragon of Team Achilles, and Patroclus, and all of those there's a suspicious white box below that, which makes me think the biggest reveals are still to come for combined army. What's hidden under those blocks? It looks like 2 units. We don't really know what they are. Could they be an extension of Team Achilles? Are we only seeing a small part of that right now? Is there more to come? I think potentially, because as the video breaks down the sections, we'd see most of those sections actually accounted for. And so I think we might see either an extension of Team Achilles in that white box, or something even more shocking than Achilles going over to the combined army. So when we look at this, we've also got, it looks as though there's actually maybe a bit of a mistake, which I've only just noticed as I'm actually going through a couple of sections to talk to you about that. In the main screenshot, you can see it's got Teucer, the shooter of Team Achilles, Teucer, the dragon of Team Achilles. But as you scroll the video forward, there's a screenshot that says Teucer, the shooter of Team Achilles, and then Drakios, Team Achilles dragon, which makes more sense. This video is going to be focusing on Achilles and how he ended up being part of the combined army. And the answer, I'm going to segue so smoothly, actually lies in Endsong. So there had been some comments that led me down this path to a degree where it was like, oh, we actually saw a little bit of this coming in Endsong. And so I actually went on a bit of a hunt, and I was like, I don't remember seeing anything in there that would lead me to believe that. And so I've gone through and I've been reading quite a few sections of Endsong to think, well, actually, was it in there, or are people reading between the lines? So I'm going to read you a couple of excerpts from Endsong so that you can be up to speed as to why Achilles has ended up with a combined army, or at least the breadcrumbs that we've been left. And the first section that we get a bit of an instance that this is where things are happening is when we get into fairly early on, page 13 of Endsong. And it's under the section that's Playground Dagama, which is obviously part of the Dagama takeover, which was that narrative event that several people, including myself, partook in. This is actually reading from the book. Playground Dagama. We had defended our positions in Dagama tooth and nail, stood firm, recaptured lost locations, held our ground, resisted and hit back hard. Despite everything the combined army had thrown at us, Dagama was still ours. We had the best on the ground. The Nibelung spear on one flank and the Atrades mace on the other. On the west flank, the best of all the military orders that the Neo-Vatican could deploy on Concilium. On the east, the troops of the Phalanx, under the command of Agamemnon the Atrades. These were 2 forces that knew how to fight the Morat on their own terms. 2 forces that were not frightened by the violence or savagery of the Morat, because they themselves could match these foes in aggressiveness and brutality. 2 forces for which the word surrender did not exist. So when the Cerberus blockade fell, when the ships started raining down on Dagama, we didn't worry too much. Those ships were gravely mistaken and had landed in the wrong territory. The spear and the mace would finish them off.
Their numerical superiority did not matter. The combat drop conditions had dispersed their forces in such a way that they could not take full advantage of their weighted numbers. The expertise of the spear and the mace forced them to fight in isolation, preventing them from regrouping. This did not mean that it was easy, that we did not suffer defeats. The Morat were as ruthless as they were brutal, and there were times when they prevailed. There were times when it seemed the tables would turn against us. But then, blazing down from orbit like a meteor, came Achilles. A furious Achilles, enraged by the death of his friend Patroclus. Agamemnon continued to command because Achilles' only goal was to be on the front line, killing as many aliens as he could, carving a bloody path through their numbers. His arrival was a real boost to the morale of the troops of the Steel Phalanx, who found themselves carried on by the impetus and the fury of the swift-footed champion. Despite the arrival of Achilles and a commitment of the Knights and military orders, engaged in a true crusade to expel the aliens from the planet, it was not enough. Not because they lacked the required courage, nor for any lack of strength, for even when they were outmatched, Nibelungs and the Atrades knew how to resist and triumph. No, it was not enough because of a strategic failure. We knew the modus operandi of the combined army. We knew that even when they embarked on a blitzkrieg, they always consolidated positions, never left flanks unprotected, always secured the conquered ground, and they were precise and efficient. But we were wrong. For after nearly a decade of fighting for territory, we had lost sight of the EI's true goal. It was not Dagama, it was not Concilium Prima, nor even the human sphere. It was the penny arcade, the Tzedci digester. And our blindness caused us to lose everything. Our forces on the ground could not be blamed. The Nebulung spear and the Atrades' mace had fulfilled their orders to the letter. The problem was that the orders were wrong. We should have established a ring of steel around the penny arcade, the research facility that housed the Chi digester, even if it meant giving away its position, which was already compromised, although we didn't know that yet. A defensive ring that would allow an emergency evacuation in case the position was severely threatened. However, we preferred to leave the penny arcade hidden in plain sight, with a defensive group that would be insufficient in the event of a massive and direct attack, but would not attract the attention of any intelligence. We knew we would have plenty of time to redeploy our forces and reinforce the penny arcade in the event of a new combined army offensive. With their usual strategy of consolidating positions, they would not advance fast enough to reach the penny arcade before our forces joined the defensive ring. The plan was solid, but it failed miserably the instant that the combined armies stepped on the gas and advanced directly towards the penny arcade that they had already located without caring to consolidate. We didn't realize that, for the combined army, taking over the penny arcade was a game, set, and match situation. It was to force the endgame in the human sphere for them, and that is why they had launched themselves like an overwhelming force upon that research center, in such a way that the defense group could barely contain them, forcing an emergency evacuation that opened the doors to a different and totally unexpected army. And that comes from an extract from the report of Colonel Mariette Wincoup, Bureau Aegis officer before the O12 Security Council in closed session. Access authorization required, Alpha. That leads us more towards the penny arcade and the Toha stealing the Tzedci digester, or trying to, which actually unleashes the quantum anomaly zones and the wormholes and all of that. That's the main storyline for Endsong, where a lot of people's attention went, with the Toha betrayal and the combined army consolidating. Achilles, full of rage, joins the fight, and the forces seem to be getting overwhelmed with the combined armies. Does that lead us to something that happens with Achilles that is worth talking about? Yes, it does. This is not related to Achilles, but it's important to his storyline. That's why I've extracted it, and I'm going to share it with you to give us a sense as to where we're building to with Achilles. And that's Directive 7. Listed under the Aleph section of the Endsong. It's an excerpt after a bit of a background around the Steel Phalanx, but it's talking about the process of what happens when these recreations, which obviously Aleph leans into, the AI, in building these recreations like Achilles, Patroclus, Hector, all of those ones that we know and love. The Directive 7 reads, this is verbatim, should a SSS operative fall into enemy hands and be taken prisoner, he or she must cease access to Aleph immediately and end his or her own existence as soon as circumstances permit. Under no circumstances will measures be put in place to recover alive a SSS operative that had been taken prisoner by combined army forces. The aim of Directive 7 is to preserve the safety of the sphere's data network and the integrity of Aleph. A sepsitorized SSS operative with a fully functional Cube 2 and clearance codes could potentially access the Aleph network and corrupt it from the inside. The infection would spread like a plague through the Aleph system and use it as a launchpad to reach humanity's global data sphere, a catastrophe of colossal proportions. And that's from an article by Dr. Yan Mei for the Journal of the Legal Studies of the Info University of Yangzhou, province of Yalang, Shantang. Guess who has a cube? Yep, and probably clearance codes to a lot of the Aleph stuff. Achilles being very high up in Aleph, Steel Phalanx. Doesn't seem great. Basically needs an immediate shutdown. We then get another bit here, which I'll read all of because I think only the second half is actually relevant to what we're seeing here. But I think to maybe more experienced people, the first half might be, so I'm going to read the whole thing. From the Aleph section, a couple of sections later, after that we'll get more experience around Aleph and all of that. So this section is called Harsh Orders. Did he agree to deploy as ordered? Helen ignored the neutral voice in the depths of her mind, forcing her pace, her heels echoing through the empty and gloom-filled corridors of the space station. It was everything she could do not to start running, terrified of what she had faced a few moments ago. A myrmidon, in the characteristic black armour of the personal guard, came to attention, clearly surprised at seeing her alive. It was that fear she saw in his eyes. She did what was expected of her, and ignored the shock trooper while carefully reading his body language, attitude, smell, Quantronic patina. But there was nothing to read. He was a perfect warrior, the best Aleph can create, except for the Homerids, of course. Yet worried, grieving, fearful. When is he going to deploy? He is required in Dagama. The voice in her head echoed in a deeper tone, slightly annoyed, authoritarian. She shuddered, shook her beautiful head, causing a cascade of pink, violet hair, blinking her exquisite hazel eyes. A holographic image projected in front of her, showing the hollow files of the boarding action where the Morat had ambushed the Myrmidons. Steel Phalanx deployed and engaged perfectly. The team leaders followed the protocols and strategies. The aliens fought as expected, and eventually their gunship would have fallen to Diomedes and his team if not for the Nexus. Diomedes fell straight into the Quantronic ambush. He, along with the Ekdromoi, were mowed down by the Morat heavy weaponry. The Nexus even managed to send a fake distress signal. Reinforcements were sent, with Patroclus in command. And that's when things got hairy. Too hairy. She closed her eyes, rubbed them, and shook her head. The battle was chaotic even for a Phalanx boarding action, long, brutal, and one-sided. In retrospect, the UI was expecting the counterattack and reacted perfectly to the actions of the Myrmidons. It was a miracle they weren't all sepsitorized right there and then. Their backups are securely stored and quarantined, forever. Did you complete your mission? Leave me alone, I don't want to talk about it. Helen stopped, leaned against the wall and tried to recover her breath. Before the meeting, she expected him to be angry. She could feel it. But this wasn't simple sorrow or grief. It was pure, undiluted hatred. So crippling he only stood there, nude in the darkness, brooding and grinding his teeth. Even the Quantronics inside the room were disrupted by his loathing of everything. For the first time, she acknowledged fear, and it almost made her faint. She tried to complete her mission, and for the first time she was left speechless. He would not react to any entreaties, no matter how logical or impassioned they were. Only one thing came out of his mouth. He wants him back. That's not possible. There are strict protocols to prevent infection from the EI. The danger is real, and exceptions are not allowed. Now he has to lead the vanguard. Make it happen. Didn't you hear? He wants him back. That is not going to happen. You knew this. He knew. He knows this. Why is he being so difficult? Because that's who he is. Also, I think he's been talking to someone else. His rage is burning as in times of antiquity, and even his warriors are scared. You have your orders. Complete the mission. This time the voice was distinctly female and threatening. For the second time this day, she had summoned all of her valor. I am Helen, Theoroi of the Steel Phalanx. I am the daughter of gods and legends. You cannot force me to do this. You are part of us, first and foremost. You will do what is needed, or you will be subject to routine personality purge. It's your choice. Helen cringed at the sound of Aleph in her mind, wiped a tear of frustration from her perfect face, and took a deep breath. Never had she faced such a terrible task as convincing Achilles, the light-footed, to return to the field and avenge his beloved Patroclus, the hero who will never come back. Interesting note there, not just the because who he is, but also I think he's been talking to someone else. I think that's the clue that Pandora has started to be in his ear and is starting to twist him, which is interesting because Pandora is part of Steel Phalanx. I think it was Raveneye where Pandora first makes her appearance. I'm maybe getting them confused now. But yeah, interesting because I know a lot of comments when Pandora first came out was like she's a bit of a nothing-y thing. Why would anyone take her? But I think there's sometimes instances where we look at the gaming meta and go, that is useless, that doesn't have any place. And we forget about the lore and go, well, actually, maybe that's setting us up for something. So we get to the final elements of what I found in Endsong so far. And it's basically a whole page on Achilles. And the first part I won't read directly, mostly because it's basically like, these recreations are recreations of historical people. We shouldn't be surprised about how they act because they will basically act the same as how they did in antiquity or in history. What we're getting at here is Achilles' attitude after Patroclus' death is by the book. We shouldn't have expected him to do anything else than want to rush in. Even though Patroclus was lost to the combined army, Aleph is saying, you can't go back in there. Directive 7, behind enemy lines, capture. Basically just forget and leave him there and protect the Aleph AI more than go back for individuals. And so this whole section is effectively like, we shouldn't have been surprised that Achilles just wanted to run in there. I think there's a sub-layer here of someone in his ear basically telling him to go, using Patroclus as bait to maybe lure a bigger fish. And maybe that was all part of the EI's plan after all, get Patroclus in a compromised position so that Achilles comes and then that's actually the prize that they're after. What we've got here is in the balance of the command shift, when Patroclus reeled and fell in the fighting within the Cerberus wormhole orbit, Aleph refused to subject him to a resurrection, applying the strict quarantine protocols typical of those fallen behind enemy lines, as there was no guarantee that Patroclus hadn't suffered a mimetic attack that may have corrupted his backup copy. At that moment, from the Norstralia front, Achilles demanded the return of his best friend. Seeing that his demands were not met, he then requested a transfer to the front line at Concilium, the death of his most valued comrade. However, the plan of the light-footed Homerid was none other than to continue applying pressure to obtain what he most craved. And once again, Achilles refused to fight. Could we blame him for acting exactly like his original did in a similar situation? Of course not. If he had acted differently, he would not have been Achilles, the hero penned by Homer. He was sticking to the role written for him. In such a way, he would be faithful to his mould, and thus finally, after many discussions with some of the other Homeridae, Pandora would make the bold blonde Colossus give up his attitude and accept the death of his friend. What it was that she said to him we don't know, but it did make Achilles see reason, although seeing his later savage behaviour in battle, and the rage with which he fought the alien forces, the term come to his senses would not be the most appropriate to define his brutal attitude on the Dagama front. Therefore Achilles should not be blamed. A hero was faithful to the role that had been written for him, and which he could not relinquish, a role written down thousands of years ago by the light of a campfire during some already forgotten war. Oblivion is the destiny of everything that lacks glory, and there is nothing that a Homerid fears more than the void of the absence of memory. Achilles is a man who aspires to be more through glory and fame, so the immortality that is obtained by being known and remembered by all, just as happened to his namesake in the Iliad, since both have been written in the same way. That's an extract from the report prepared by Dr. Stella Sion, Professor of Neuroprogramming and Evolutionary Development of AI at the University of Mannheim, and consultant to Bureau Toth at the request of the Concilium Coordinated Command. So with all of that in Endsong, and with the backstory of Kodali being sepulturized, which if you need the lore for that's betrayal, where we don't really see the origination of how Kodali got sepulturized. What we see is Kodali being captured by the Eugene forces, and then unsure as to whether she's been fully sepulturized, whether she's actually deep undercover with the combined army. That's still a big question mark, and actually it's just a cool bit of lore if you haven't read it yourself. But could it be the case that members of Team Achilles and Steel Phalanx and all the others have been sepulturized, have been heavily compromised? A lot of speculation at the moment in the forums around, does that mean that Achilles is no longer going to be available in Steel Phalanx? Possibly. I can't really see there being a version of Achilles in Steel Phalanx, while there's also potentially a sepulturized version in Combined Army. It seems as though from what I've read around Directive 7 and other things, that they would refuse, if someone's been compromised, then they wouldn't be bringing them back yet, or until they know that it hasn't been compromised. And so we know that from Patroclus, which again really confuses me
You can probably tell that I'm distracted at the moment. I couldn't see Patroclus in Steel Phalanx. I don't remember seeing Patroclus in Vanilla, but I'm just doing a double check to make sure that I'm not making things up. Obviously, Patroclus maybe fighting in this lore, but not being an element that shows it's just lore, it's not actually tied into the fighting. I do feel like Patroclus is definitely not going to be anywhere other than Combined Army, because it was actually written there that there's not going to be a resurrection protocol for that. Interestingly enough, though, reading some comments in the forums, Achilles didn't seem to be that popular for a lot of people, and so I wonder if maybe from the list stats or something like that, Corvus Belli have looked at that and just go, if Achilles is unpopular in Steel Phalanx, maybe we can do something in the lore side of things to make him more relevant. Maybe they were looking at the army list and just going, hey, look, do you know what? Not being played there can progress the lore, bring Achilles into it, could be quite a cool addition to that. Kadali, I don't think I've seen her played a lot in Combined Army, maybe once or twice, but definitely from a lore perspective, it's really cool to have that in there. So that's what I've uncovered so far about how Achilles has maybe ended up in this pickle, what that means for Steel Phalanx players, losing Achilles and a couple of others. I think Patroclus is new into Combined Army, but look in the comments to see someone who's actually played Steel Phalanx and Aleph a lot to potentially correct me. Pandora, probably double agent, won't be in Aleph, I imagine, now that is in Combined Army. And Achilles, I can't imagine he is going to stay in Aleph, which is also slightly ironic and maybe painful because there is that sculpt of him holding up the Morat head, although the Combined Army unit head, and maybe there was something in the blood there. Interesting. What do you think? Have you read something different in Endsong that might be worth highlighting? Do you think, what do you feel about this change? Are you still a Phalanx player and actually feels quite shocked and hurt that you've lost an iconic aspect of the army over to the Combined Army? Are you curious to see what is happening with Aleph? Maybe Aleph has got some cool new stuff, where the lore is going with it. Maybe the Aleph AI has been compromised through shenanigans with Patroclus and Achilles. We just don't know where the lore is heading in that regard. Really keen to hear your thoughts on what you think of these updates, and I'll be back soon with another video.